Okay, thanks for joining us this evening. I have to admit that I am away from Dallas trying to orchestrate this from afar, and I have a colleague back in Dallas helping me through. So for the moment, I think I'm on screen. I'm Rochelle Weiss-Crane. I am the Director of Israel Engagement and Jewish Living at the J, and I have the pleasure of producing the book festival. I'm going to introduce Andrea Peskin Katz, a Dallasite who is friend to many of us, who runs an incredible online book salon. She's a friend to authors and readers alike and doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. Thanks so much, Andrea. I am going to go off camera and hope that everyone can see you next when you start speaking. That is what I think is going to happen. And audience, please bear with us if that doesn't happen right away, and we will fix it. Andrea.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. And I'm so glad you're all here. I'm Andrea Peskin Katz. I run the Great Thoughts, Great Readers book salon on Facebook, and I see many of our members here, so I'm thrilled. Linda and Jean are huge favorites in my group, and their books are amazing, so this is really exciting. It's also very exciting because Linda was actually supposed to be in Dallas about 3 years ago when we got hit with the tornado, literally like the week before she was supposed to be here. And she didn't get to come because the JCC was closed for many months. So it's about time, Linda, next time in person.
Yes.
So it is an honor to have Linda Loyman and Jean Meltzer with us tonight. So this is like kind of uncanny. They both, without really knowing each other at all, wrote books about Jewish matchmakers. And my favorite movie is Crossing Delancey, years and years ago. I'm probably dating myself. And each of their books could easily be in Crossing Delancey. Linda's book basically is Crossing Delancey. And so needless to say, I was sold. So Jean's book, Mr. Perfect on Paper, came out in August. I had the privilege of reading it early. And then Linda sent me her book very early. And I immediately emailed them both and said, okay, you two have to be friends and do events together. And now they're doing a ton of events together because they both wrote the Perfect Jewish Matchmaker books. And I love that. So here we are. And then I went to Rochelle Weiss-Crane and I said, we have to do a Matchmaker event. And she said, what are you talking about? And so we got her both the books and she called me almost immediately and said, yes, Andrea, we have to do this event. So I'm thrilled that everybody is here. And The Matchmaker's Gift by Linda comes out on Tuesday. So everybody run out and buy the book. So we're at her pre-launch and that's very exciting. She's one of the books of the week in the New York Post and in Parade magazine. So we're kind of with royalty and that's great. So I'm not going to give any spoilers because I want everybody, I know many of you have read Jean's book, but have not yet read Linda's book. So we're not going to give spoilers. We're just going to talk around the books and talk about what's going on with the books so that feel free to go ahead and buy them and read them. And I hope you will. If you have any questions, if you type them in the chat, I will try to remember to look at them later in the program. So to give you an idea why I love these two books and these authors, I want to read you some quotes from the book. And I was telling the authors how unusual it is that the quotes I chose could really apply to either of their books. And I'm like, it's like they had the same brain when they were doing this. So these are quotes from Jean's book, Mr. Perfect on Paper. A famous Yiddish curse. I love this one. May all your teeth fall out except one, but may it always hurt. I mean, come on, is that not the quintessential Jewish grandmother? Then another one. Dara recalled an old Yiddish saying, it's a mitzvah to wear their clothes, it's a sin to walk in their shoes. And I had to stop and think about that one. There was also this fact, not everybody liked the Jews. To publicize your identity to a complete stranger always carried a risk. It's interesting because you wrote it in the past tense, but boy, Jane, that could be present as well. Then here's some from the matchmaker's gift. The light you saw between your sister and her husband was not a trick of the sun. You've been blessed with eyes that can see the light of soulmates reaching for each other. Like, are you kidding me? Oh my God, amazing. Oh, sweetheart, I've been on my share of cruises and those ships always turn around. You're going to have to trust me, Tatala. In 80 years, I've never been wrong. I mean, amazing. When you weep, the one you are meant for, taste the salt of your tears. And tell me if all those quotes can go in both books. And I think it's amazing. So tonight, what we're going to do is first, we're going to start with Jean, since Mr. Perfect on Paper is already out. And I'm going to give you some background on her and then let her chat for a little while. Then we'll do the same with Linda, and then we'll open it up to questions. Jean burst into the book world. It wasn't even just a quiet, here's my debut novel. It was a burst with the Matzo Ball in 2021 and 2020. And when I say she burst, it was a best romance book of the month in October 2021. It was blurbed by none other than Debbie Maycomer. And my favorite blurb of all of them was from Rachel Lynn Solomon, a great Jewish author, who said, a love letter to Judaism, an utterly charming romance. And what so many people said to me was, it was the rom-com we all knew we needed, but we didn't know we needed it because we had not seen Jewish representation in the fun rom-com world. And now Jean burst in and now we've got it. I love her bio. She has the unique distinction of being the world's only Emmy Award-winning, chronically ill and disabled rabbinical school dropout. Yes, it is this extraordinary background coupled with a firm belief in holding on to your joy and seeking out happy endings, which forms the basis for her diverse book. Jean, tell us a little bit about you, your writing, your journey, because your journey is certainly interesting. A point of information for all of us who go to Congregation Anshe Torah, Jean was actually in rabbinical school with Rabbi Kushnick, which I just love. And he said his whole rabbinical class just loves that now she's a romance author. So Jean, why don't you give us some background and tell us a little bit about the Matzo Ball, which incorporated chronic fatigue syndrome, and now Mr. Perfect with anxiety, because Jean really has captured representation, not just of neurotic Jewish women, which we all are, but also of things that really afflict people. So Jean, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jean Meltzer. First off, thank you so much for having me here today. Linda, congratulations. As you know, both myself and my mother loved your book. So I'm very excited that not only is it coming out shortly for everyone to read, but that hopefully it'll be in lots of book clubs and families will get to read it the way me and my mom did so many months ago. So that was an amazing introduction, Andrea. Thank you so much. I don't know how much you guys know or don't know about me, but as you know, I'm the author of The Matzo Ball, which was a Hanukkah rom-com. A little bit about my journey. When I was 15 years old, I knew exactly what I was going to do in life. I was going to be a TV producer in New York City. I wanted to live in an apartment with white walls and wood floors. I wanted to have black pantsuits and cat glasses and, you know, be one of those strong, independent Manhattanite women. And I was well on that path. I went to NYU Tisch to study dramatic writing. After graduation, I, within the first 6 months, sold a format to Discovery Channel. Within a year, I had won an Emmy. And by the time I was 23, I was producing a daily television series for Discovery. I was creative director of a company that did television and film, and I was very, very successful. But I was also incredibly unhappy. Joke's on me. So basically what happened is one day I went to Rosh Hashanah services, which were coming up on, as you all know. And my rabbi was giving a speech on Ayecha, which if you don't know, maybe some of you know or don't know, it's the first time God speaks to man. Adam has just eaten from the tree of forbidden fruit. And God says, Ayecha, where are you? Because Adam is hiding. And of course, the commentators ask the question, why does God ask this question? It's God, right? He knows where Adam is. And the message is that it's a question to us. We're always supposed to be asking ourselves, where are we? And so in that moment, I realized I was completely lost. I did not know what I was doing. I was like 24, did not know what I was doing with my life. And I decided had been living for my goals and I needed to be living for my values. So at that moment, I went back to the only value system I knew, which was Judaism. And I began a long process. And what it led me to realize through study and Torah and recommitting to my community was that I needed to be Jewish in order to be happy. So I quit my job, boarded a plane, made my mother cry, and moved to Israel to study to become a rabbi. And long story short, I spent 5 years in rabbinical school until my chronic illness, which I had had since I was 18, worsened, and I had no choice but to withdraw. And then I have been since then, basically homebound. I've been disabled and homebound and haven't been able to work outside the home in over a decade. I don't have children. Basically everything in order to stay at this level of health has to revolve around my disease and staying healthy. But what that ultimately led me to was writing the matzo ball. The pandemic happened. I had an experience with my niece where she made a comment about noses, and I realized that we didn't have enough positive stories about Jewish women and Jewish men. And so I sat down to write a book for her, a book where Jewish women never bemoaned the size of their nose, where Jewish men were sexy, where Jews were the heroes of their own stories. Because I realized there is a danger in telling one type of story in this world. And I think we all know what type of story I'm talking about. So that led me to write the matzo ball. And Andrea's right, the book took off without me. I had no idea. I originally wrote it thinking it would never get published. So I had no idea it would go all the places it did. And within that came my second book, which is Mr. Perfect on Paper. Should I talk a little bit about the book now or do? Okay, great.
Please.
So Mr. Perfect on Paper is about a third generation shachranit or matchmaker named Dara Rabinowitz. And Dara finds her private search for love inadvertently thrust into the national spotlight when her bubby shares her list for the perfect Jewish husband on national television. But as a nationwide hunt ensues, she finds that her heart is drawn more and more towards Christopher Steadfast, the totally charming but also really not Jewish reporter following the story. And I was inspired to write this book based on my own love story. I was a first-year rabbinical student. I was deeply committed to my faith. I am deeply committed to my faith. When, plot twist, I fell in love with a non-Jewish man. And for all the reasons, I felt that it was very important that the matzo ball be about two Jewish characters falling in love. I felt the same way for Mr. Perfect on Paper, that we needed a book that really explored some of the myths that I had grown up with regarding not just Jewish love, but interfaith marriage. And so that's what Mr. Perfect is on Paper is about. It is about a woman who loves her faith, who loves being Jewish, who is doing everything humanly possible to marry a nice, good Jewish boy, as I'm sure many of us grew up in a family that said, bring home whoever, but they better be Jewish. And then finds themselves, even in spite of all of this, falling in love with a non-Jew and how they maneuver that. So that's me, and that's Matzo Ball, and that's Mr. Perfect on Paper. And thank you again for having me here.
Also, I need to give a shout out, Matzo Ball, anyone who went to Jewish summer camp or had kids go to Jewish summer camp, she nails it. And in Mr. Perfect on Paper, I think you also really nailed the respect that we're all raised with for the women in our families. And I especially love that. Jean is not just writing representation for Jews, for chronically disabled people. In Mr. Perfect on Paper, she also talks about crippling anxiety. But I think it's also important to say she's writing really strong women. And I think that's also really noteworthy in the romance genre. So now let's talk about my friend Linda. Now, Linda and I have been good friends for a long time, and we're personal friends. So it's always dicey when a good friend sends me their book, because I get a little nervous, like, what if I don't like it as much as I like the last one? And I remember her first book, I mean, I loved it. I was gaga cuckoo over it. So then when I read her second book, which I really loved, Linda goes, oh, you didn't like it as much as the last one. Well, that's not true. But in this case, when she sent me this book, I called her and told her this one was magic, because where Linda has really focused on historical fiction with strong Jewish families. This one has some magic in it. And she said people have even joked that now she writes romance, because I don't think Linda set out to write a romance, but you wrote such a magical book. And I love in your Publishers Weekly glowing review, they start with the charming latest from Linda Loyman adds a twinkle of magic to the twin stories of Sarah Glickman, a Jewish Moldovan immigrant, and her granddaughter. And again, the symmetry with Jean's book is like crazy, but I love that they also saw the magic. And I love that it let me as your friend see the magic that goes on in your head. Linda's first book, The Two-Family House, will always be in my top 5 of favorite books. And then her second book, The Wartime Sisters, really nailed part of World War II in the United States that none of us knew about, and how strong the women had to be when the men went to war. And that was especially noteworthy because so many people write the book set in Europe, and Linda really nailed one set in the United States. And that's important. And now we come to magic with the Matchmaker's Gift. And I'm just gaga over it. And I'm so glad we can finally chat with you. So tell us a little bit about you and the Matchmaker's Gift.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Rochelle. And thank you, Andrea, for being such a good friend to me for all these years, because you did. I remember Kathleen Carter was the one who said, you have to go on Facebook and go join this Great Thoughts, Great Readers. And she sent you my book, and you were like my instant friend. So I so appreciate all your support for so long. And Jean is such a delight. I mean, look at her. She's, I feel like she's my younger sister because I'm a good deal.
Exactly.
But she just, there are people that you meet and just their warmth just shines out, and just everyone senses it. So I think everyone, even over the interwebs, we all can see how sweet and warm Jean is. So I'm really excited to be here with both of you and to be with all of everybody else virtually. The Matchmaker's Gift is a dual timeline story. It's my first dual timeline story. And it is, like Andrea said, it's about Sarah, who is a turn of the century matchmaker. She comes to New York when she's 10 years old on a ship, and she has this gift for seeing other people's soulmates. And then the other timeline is about her granddaughter in 1994, who has inherited that gift, but it's very problematic because she is a divorce attorney. So that is very dicey. And it was not a book that I was thinking about writing at all. I was in the middle of writing another book. And it was March of 2020. I was in the middle of writing another book. My daughter calls me hysterical from college and says, we have to be out by Sunday. And my daughter came home, and she brought home her roommate. Later on, her boyfriend came too, but immediately at the beginning, she just brought home her roommate. And my daughter's name is Ellie. Her roommate's name is Adele. And Ellie and Adele were our COVID gifts. The book is dedicated to them because the first thing that happened was, here we are with these college-age women. I'm used to living in a house of men with just my husband and my son and my dog, who is a boy. And then these two very bright, very ambitious college-age women come home, and they talk to us about their classes. The whole conversation around the dinner table is elevated, and we're talking about women's issues in a way that we never have talked about them really, before. We're talking about the different things they're facing at school and the worries that they have about going into the working world. And I'm thinking that things have not really changed so much in the 30 years since I went to college. And so that's one of the thoughts that was just sort of swirling in my head at that time. And then at the same time, as we were just having these dinners and these conversations, we were also binge watching TV, as we all were. And we were binge watching, one of ours was Indian matchmaking, which was this fascinating show. And at the end of watching like all of the episodes, Adele turns to me and she says, my grandmother used to be an Orthodox Jewish matchmaker in Brooklyn. And she pulls up on her phone this article from 1977 that has this picture of her grandmother. I'm not going to try to share my screen now, but I can maybe do it later. But this picture of her grandmother with her arms outstretched, and it's an article that says like making a match for Brooklyn's Jews. And in the article, it also talks about another woman who talks about this woman's filing cabinets, the filing cabinets that she has with all the files of her matches. And immediately, for those of you who like me, like still read children's books, like I think of the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, right? Like the file cabinets and what is in these file cabinets. And I just knew that I wanted to write a matchmaker story. So I got Adele's blessing. The story is not about her at all. Has nothing to do with her and her grandmother, but it is a grandmother-granddaughter story. And I talked to my agent, and my agent said, write it. And my editor wanted it. And they all said, put that thing that you're working on aside and start this. And then I knew I was writing it. But the problem was, sounds like a romance story, right? Like a matchmaker story, but I don't write romance. I'm a historical fiction author. So I had to come at it from a historical perspective. And the first thing I had to do was research and try to figure out what time periods I was even going to write about. Because it was very tempting to pick the 1950s for the grandmother, because we all love the 50s, right? It's like a Mrs. Maisel thing. And in fact, after I finished this book, Mrs. Maisel had the whole matchmaking storyline, which was really funny. But when I started researching, the first thing I found was something from the museum at Eldridge's website that talked about it was called Love on the Lower East Side. And it just had so many great references to weddings and matchmakers. And I learned so much. I learned about this wedding of the daughter of the pickle millionaire of New York, and this woman who was the daughter of a Romanian immigrant, and he owned a big pickle company, like in Crossing Delancey that Andrea loves so much. And the New York Times covered her wedding. 2,000 people were invited. It was crazy. The New York Times had this line that I love so much that said, "The smell of orange blossoms and roses mingled with the odor of pickled herring and jarred pickles." So I read that line and I had to write that time period, because how could I let go of that? How could I not incorporate that somehow? And then I found out in other articles and just sources that there were over 5,000 matchmakers in New York in the 1920s, which was crazy. And that the bulk of them were men. And that people wanted to go to men for this because it was a business, it was a real business. And so that immediately started a conflict going in my head. What if I had this young woman, and what if she could see who people's soulmates would be? What if she had this gift that none of those men had, but she was young and she was a woman and she wasn't married? And, if you learn a little bit about modesty laws in Judaism, like an unmarried woman is not supposed to be really even talking to other unmarried men, touching unmarried men. And they're certainly never supposed to be matchmakers. I mean, unmarried men or women aren't supposed to be matchmakers. You're not supposed to be doing that. If you can't, you have to learn how to do it yourself before you can try to set up other people. So there was a lot of meaty stuff to sink my teeth into. And that was kind of where I got started. And then all of that research was a lot of fun. I had a lot of help with a lot of the Yiddish phrases, because Adele is fluent in Yiddish, and she helped me with a lot of that. A lot of other people did too. And there were just beautiful things that I found as I was researching that just filled me with so much joy. And the strange thing is, my other two books are pretty serious. Not that they're unhappy books with unhappy endings, because they're not. They're all very hopeful at the end, but this is by far and away my most joyful story. And I wrote it at like the darkest time of our collective sort of history, which is just a really interesting twist to my writing career. And I wrote it really quickly. The older timeline, the more modern timeline of Abby, the divorce attorney, was not very tough to research because I was an attorney. I wasn't a divorce lawyer, but I was a lawyer in 1994. I'm pretty much the same age as Abby. And I did work on a couple of prenuptial agreements and some really strange ones with some semi-celebrities, and I drew on that for writing some of Abby's story. But the book is, I don't know what you'd call it. It's historical, but it has a romantic element. It has a dash of magical realism to it. It just has a little bit of something for everyone. So I'm excited for people to read it finally, because I feel like I've just been holding it for so long. Like Jean knows, like when you write a book, it takes a long time for it to get out into the world. So you just have it to yourself for a very long time. And it's very exciting when other people start to read what you've poured your guts into.
Absolutely. And it's magic. And parts of Jean's book are magic too, because I think when anybody finds someone, clearly it's magic, both Jean's personal story and how the book is. I want to ask both of you. I love the focus on the strong women. Linda and I have both shared stories with each other and recipes and what cookbooks and haggadahs our late mothers used, but you both focus very strongly on the strong grandmother, and I love that. So Jean, tell us, was there someone that was based on, or was it just your love of Jewish families?
So my Bubby Miriam is very much based on my grandmother, Julie. My grandma, Julie, was a dancer, much like Bubby Miriam was. My grandfather was her second husband because her first husband died of the Spanish flu when she was like 20, so left her with a baby. She was a firecracker. She was one of 5 girls. And so we didn't have a lot of extended family, but the extended family I did have were all like much older. So in terms of like holla back girls and things like that, that was very much my experience. I was always sort of surrounded by like these elderly octogenarian firecracker women. And I mean, I still am when we would have weddings and bar mitzvahs, and those were the great aunts, great uncles came down. My grandfather was one of 5 boys and my grandmother was one of 5 girls. So you can imagine there were a lot of great aunts and great uncles. But yeah, she was totally a strong, amazing, loving woman. And a lot of like, when I was writing her, I was absolutely channeling my grandma, Julie.
We felt it. What about you, Linda?
So I was very lucky to have my grandmother for a very long time. My mother's mother, Tilly. And Tilly died when she was 92. So she knew my children, she had her great grandchildren. And she also was like a woman with no filter. She did not have a great love of her life, which is sad. So she wasn't like Sarah in that respect. She, in fact, had a really sad marriage, and my grandfather was not. My grandfather was kind of like the original Voldemort. Like, we never said his name. They stayed married, but they were separated. But we never said his name. My grandmother would refer to him as himself. So he was like, we never ever named him. But she was very resilient, and she was very happy for everyone else's romance and love. She was very excited for me when I got married. She loved my husband. And there are definitely, her voice was in my head for a lot of when I was writing Sarah, even though they're not at all the same person.
Sure.
But that closeness between the grandmother and the granddaughter in my story comes from our closeness. And also just in my story, Sarah really has to fight against this whole cabal of male matchmakers. And my grandmother had a lot of fights in her life, not a lot of specific, she was a fighter. Mm-hmm. She had a lot that she was going up against, and she didn't back down, and Sarah doesn't back down either. And so there is something in the story of her spirit in that way.
Which also somewhat goes to when you were talking about what your daughter and her friend were telling you about. Mm-hmm. Many of the challenges we all faced when we were young in our careers and in school haven't changed all that dramatically.
Yeah.
And
especially now, there are a lot of things where we feel like we're going backwards in terms of what women, are getting to do.
Sure.
And I think it's one thing when it's us. The girls were asking me about, some stories when I was working as a lawyer. And I had one story that I'm not going to get into, but that was not a great story that happened to me when I was working. And it's one thing to kind of face misogyny or discrimination, when it's you. When I think about my daughter who's applying to law school now, who wants to be, when I think about like anybody talking to her the way some of the partners at my very first law firm talked to me, I get enraged. Like, I can't, yes. For me, I could handle it. But like when I think about her having to deal with it, it just makes me crazy, because I know how hard she works. I know how smart she is, so it's like, I think we all want for our, mm-hmm. the generations that come after us, we all want it to be better, always.
Absolutely. Linda has also helped me a lot with parenting. She told me exactly when my kids should take the ACT. We did exactly what she said, and
It's
she
only
was
because
right.
I'm a few years, my kids are a few years ahead of yours. That's why.
So it's also good to be friends with Linda because I just kind of was her little sponge and followed behind her. So Jean, were you a romance reader before you wrote the Matzo Ball?
So it's interesting. I think I'm like a lot of Jews in that I didn't actually pick up a romance book until much later in my life. I grew up like probably many of us with a huge library in my house and a Jewish library. And I look back, I can't remember one romance book on that shelf. So I actually didn't come to it. As I had talked about being chronically ill and disabled, I've been disabled for about 10 years, but there were 2 years when I left rabbinical school where I basically was almost completely bedbound. Like I didn't leave my apartment for about 2 years. And my biggest like leaving the event would be like going to the grocery store for a half an hour, maybe like once every month or 2 months. That would be like my big event. And so despite as sick as I was at some point in this, I realized that even if I never left the house again, even if I was always really sick, even if nothing ever came from it of me just being disabled, that I needed to hold on to my joy. And so I made a decision to do that, right? I cut out anything negative from my life. I turned off the news. I stopped going on Facebook, and one of the ways to try to get healthier was just staying as positive and maintaining my joy. And how I started doing that was I was like, well, let me read some romance. This is supposedly a happy genre. I had an unlimited Kindle subscription at that point, right? And there was a lot of free romance on it. And I sort of discovered romance by accident. But once I did, I was completely hooked. And I just started reading tons of romance. And I started in the indie world, but then I kind of went into Harlequin, and before long, I was reading any romance I could get my hands on. And I guess it was a natural progression then that when I wanted to start writing stories again, or when I felt well enough to start writing again, in order to stay in that happy place, I just didn't want to write anything dark. So I started writing romance stories for fun. And then it led me to the Matzo.
And I know many writers say, even if the book isn't Jewish, they write with a Jewish lens. What I love is you didn't just write with the Jewish lens, you wrote the Jews. And it's kind of like when Jamie Brenner started writing summer beach books, and she said she took the Jews to the beach because in the past only the Goyim could afford the big beach houses. Well, you gave us the romance with the Jews. And again, I don't think anybody knew how much we needed it, but it was really interesting on Instagram, where there are very passionate bookstagrammers who love books. They started creating lists of books with Jewish representation. And I really credit Jean for kind of igniting that in all of us, that we didn't know we were looking for it, but by God, we were going to find it. And so that's also amazing what you've done for the genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is there's definitely been Jewish writers and of romance, and there's been books with Jewish protagonists. But I think it's important that we see the whole sort of world of Judaism reflected in our romance novels. And I think it's good that we're seeing more orthodox or more observant stories. I think for me, it's where I connect with the story the most because it's my experience. So I'm glad that, I think there was a little maybe fear in publishing that people wouldn't read these types of books if we went too Jewish. And it's been wonderful to see the response that people do want these stories, both Jews and non-Jewish. So.
And I'll mention that the Matzo Ball will soon be a movie, and I'm hoping Mr. Perfect on paper will be too.
Yes, me too.
So Linda, each of your books focuses on a Jewish family. Your first book was really centered around brothers, which was interesting because you were really writing to very different male characters. Your second book was sisters, and this book is a family. And what I've heard you tell me before, tell me about your love of stories and Jews telling stories, because Linda is the Jewish raconteur.
You're nice. I don't know. I just feel like the two family house was a story that I had in my head for like 15 years before I wrote it down. So I never run out of ideas, unfortunately, because I can't even put them on paper. Really, I just can't. I'm a very slow writer and a very fast thinker, although also a slow thinker in a way. I don't know. Part of my whole process of writing is sitting and really thinking through my characters. So I could just be sitting on the couch all day, but really that's work. Like, my children would make fun of me and say that that's a joke, that it's not work.
Of course they
would. It is, because in order to create the characters as three-dimensional people and to make sure that my stories have all those layers and those connections, you need to really sit and think through everything for a long time. I can't rush it. It doesn't work that way. But I feel very lucky that I get to tell stories. And I do feel a responsibility to tell Jewish stories. And Holocaust stories are not what I want to write. I don't feel that it's my place to write them. I didn't have relatives who had a lot of those stories to tell me growing up. I know a lot of people do. I kind of feel like we have a glut of Holocaust stories. Not that they're not important to write and to hear, because they absolutely are, but they're not for me to tell. And I think for what I want to do is just tell stories about people, and some of those people will be Jewish. And some of the characters will be, and some of the characters won't be. But I feel like there's just more to Jewish life than Holocaust stories. With the Matchmaker's Gift, one of the things actually that I really love about Sarah's evolution as a character is that when she starts out, she's matching only the people in her community, and the only people that she knows on the Lower East Side in her immigrant community are these immigrant Jews. But when she ages, and we see her throughout her life in the story, when she is in her 50s, her gift takes a turn, and she's able to see not only people's soulmates, but people who have had trauma with their romantic relationships, women who need her help to get out of abusive situations. And that's a tiny little bit of the book, but then she stops making matches, and when she's 90 years old, she starts making matches again. And at that point, her life has changed even more. And she is like so many people, she moved out of the Lower East Side. She lives still in Manhattan, but she has a much more diverse group of friends and of people who she sees on a daily basis. And her gift changes, and she matches people of all different faiths and people, of all different races. And she matches men with men and women with women. Her gift is just about seeing people's soulmates in the purest sense. And her gift doesn't discriminate at all, because her world has expanded. And so the matches that she sees expands too. And that was just a really important thing for me to add in the story. And just something that I'm really proud of. It's something that a lot of people have commented on when they've read it, that they connected with. So that was just how her gift shifts. So
two housekeeping notes. The chat is disabled, so if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. Next, Linda, I just assume everybody knows you as well as I do, so I didn't read your bio, and I apologize.
Don't worry. It's okay.
Linda's kind of over smart also. She got a BA in English and American Literature from Harvard and a JD from Columbia. Her first book was a USA Today bestseller and a nominee in the Goodreads 2016 Choice Awards. I think I voted numerous times, don't tell anybody. Her second novel, The Wartime Sisters, was selected as a Women's World Book Club pick and a top pick by Real Simple magazine. This is her third, and if I was a betting person, I would bet big on this one, that we'll be seeing it in a lot of national press. And I have been known to be a betting person, so you could say you heard it here.
See.
So, Jean, I know you just are finishing your next book. Can you tell us when we can expect it and give us a little hint?
Yes, my third book is called Kissing Kosher. It'll come out August 29th, 2023. So less than a year, right? It is about the heir to a baked goods empire who goes undercover at a small Brooklyn bakery to steal their world famous recipe for pumpkin spice babka. And when he does, of course, he meets the delectable granddaughter, who happens to also be a woman living with chronic pelvic pain. And it's a journey about can they find the right recipe to fall in love. So that'll be August 29th.
And you know, I can't wait to read it. Okay,
Yes.
and Linda, what about you?
So much. I love Jean so much. I just
Exactly, like we're like a love fest.
everything that comes out of her mouth, I just love her.
I feel the same way, Linda. I have to keep it on the download because, you know, if I go too crazy, then you'll think I'm stalking you. I'll be like, Linda.
I text her all the time, Jean.
Oh, okay,
good.
it.
Okay, so Linda, what are you working on?
So I'm working on another historical book with another like little dash of magic. It's inspired by my husband's great grandmother who graduated from pharmacy school in 1921.
Wow.
And a pharmacy is just such a great setting, right? Because people come in and they tell the pharmacist their secrets and they have all kinds of issues. And so this book is about a young woman who grows up in Brooklyn. She's the daughter of a pharmacist. She becomes a pharmacist herself, but she's kind of caught between her father's sort of very strict, unwavering, like faith in just medicine. And then she has this great aunt from the old country who sort of like tinkers with her own homemade old world remedies. And there may or may not be, there is a love potion that goes very wrong in this story. It's the sort of working title is The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. So
I love it.
Yeah, it's sort of like it was also inspired by this O. Henry story. That's called The Love Filter of Ike Schonstein, which you can find online if you ever like go. It's like a very short story by O. Henry. It's very interesting. So anyway, it's a little bit of an homage to that story too.
I'm excited. I really need to find for everybody. I read a book years ago and it was like stories from sitting around the grandmother's table and it was all Jewish women's stories. And that's what I feel like both of you write. And that people are sitting around the table telling their stories. And that's what you both seem to have really captured. I'll also tell everybody listening, if you have college daughters, give them both of Jean's books, because my rom-com reader, one of my twins, I can't pay the other one to read, but I do have one reader. And she's obsessed and wants Hillel to do a book club with Jean. So for everybody watching, I know many of you have daughters same age as my daughters and Linda's daughter, definitely get them Jean's books. So, and that's also interesting, Jean, because your books are really appealing to older folks like me and my daughter's generation.
I think it just speaks to the gap that has been in our publishing world that, you know, and I think Linda, you're doing a great job filling this gap as well, which is that we need joyous Jewish stories, right? There's a whole world of stories we can be telling, and like to focus on one type of story, we're missing so much other potential. So, you know, I love being Jewish. I love Judaism. I think there's a lot of wisdom in our stories, in our history. And I feel incredibly grateful that I get to put all that love into these books. And so I think that's what people respond to.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the Q&A, and you both need to read it later because it's an homage to both of you. We have an anonymous attendee says, can we see the sign behind Linda? Linda, can we?
Yeah. Okay, before I move, I'm just going to preface this by saying that this sign is slightly naughty, but I am a writer and I am allowed to have this sign because for me, it is not naughty at all. I love fairy tales. And this is, to me, I can't even say it.
The sign.
It says, I will pay extra for a happy ending. It's not that kind of happy ending. So for me, it is a fairy tale happy ending only. It's very glittery, and I really like.
I never even thought the dirty of it until you mentioned it.
It was my husband. He's like, "Are you sure you really want to get that?" And I was like, "What do you mean? It's great." And he's like,
I
"Don't
know. I was like,
like,
I love that sign because that's what I think about when I think of the Matchmaker's Gift, of how it's such a happy ending. So
joyful." Yeah. So
yes.
Great.
that's my sign. So nobody, please don't get offended. Please.
But she's the least naughty person, trust me. We trade Passover recipes. I mean, we're like old Jewish housewives trading recipes. Okay, in the Q&A, Missy Kirscher already gave Jean's books to her daughter, and she's already passed them on to all of her friends.
That's it.
Mindy Ehrlich, one of my favorite Jewish readers in my group, doesn't have a question but loving the discussions. She's amazing. As a Jewish woman who grew up on the Lower East Side, I am really enjoying Matchmaker's Gift, and I enjoy Two Family House. I love the matzo ball, have Mr. Perfect on paper here at home waiting to read. I enjoy reading books with Jewish themes and characters. We love Mindy. Deb Silverthorne, who we adore, who writes for the Texas Jewish Post, who wrote the great article about you guys. Thanks to both ladies. I read Matchmaker's Gift in a day and a half, really not wanting it to end, and grateful to have Mr. Perfect, also less than 2 days, also amazing. Grateful to have spoken to these ladies. We love her. Lisa Rosenberg, not a question, but both books sound fantastic, and what a wonderful talk. Oh, our dear friend Susan Seligman, one of my greatest readers.
Wow,
Linda and Jean, thank you for sharing your stories. Until I read Jean's book, I wasn't too much into rom-com, but she has converted me. I love the Jewish representation. Linda's books have each resonated with me in different ways. Jenny Walsh, author. The Inn gave me goosebumps. Linda. Debbie Stone, another one of our greatest readers, love both books. So it's an honor to have all these great readers here. So all good writers are good readers. So Linda, what are you reading lately? Not that you have a lot of time since you have a book coming out Tuesday.
So I'm reading, okay, so I should have brought them with me here. So I'm reading Lisa Rosenberg's Embers on the Wind, which is a debut novel, which is wonderful, and I highly recommend that.
Okay.
I finished a few weeks ago. I keep telling everyone to read it. It's this book called When Women Were Dragons, which sounds like it's fantasy, but it's really not. It's speculative fiction, and it's by Kelly Barnhill. It's like the 1950s, and there's a mass dragoning when women basically get really angry and are disrespected. They turn into dragons. It's really great. I can't even explain it.
We could all try that this year.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a great story. And I just read an arc of Amy Meyerson's book called The Love Scribe which is going to come out next year, which is going to be great. And also has like a lot of the same themes as Jean's book and my book. Like it's a really interesting story about someone who can write a story and make people fall in love. Like it's a really interesting book. So,
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, Jean, what are you reading?
So I was on a little bit of a break for my developmental edit. So I actually got to read a lot the last 2 weeks.
Good.
So one of the books I love, Meant to Be Mine by Hannah, I'm going to say her last name wrong, Hannah Orenstein. It's her 5th book. Yes. Beautiful, confident author, another matchmaker story. And it was just lovely. If you liked The Matchmaker's Gift or Mr. Perfect on Paper, that's a great companion to read. I'm right in the middle of Flight Girls by Noelle Salazar. Amazing. I can't believe it took me this long to read it. Is teaching me a lot about women pilots, very empowering. Also historical fiction, takes place during Pearl Harbor. Really
great book.
Great book. Yes, I'm late on that one, I know. I just read Jenny Bayless's new one coming out, Meet Me Under the Mistletoe. I love Jenny Bayless. I read basically everything she writes. I think we're very similar writers. So if you like my book, it's a Christmas book set in the UK. It's her 3rd one. she's just great. I just love her books. So that's your third one, and that will be out in like 2 or 3 weeks. And there were a whole bunch of other ones on it. And since we're going to the high holidays, I will give a shout out to a book I read every high holiday period, which is This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared by Rabbi Alan Liu. May his memory be for a blessing. I think it's the best book to get you spiritually ready for the high holidays. So that's off the top of my head what I've been reading.
That's
this
great.
week.
I'm writing that one down.
Yeah,
I am
it's
too.
a great, great book.
I'm also
Rabbi
feeling
Alan
very
Liu.
unprepared because I'm in temporary housing because we're redoing our house. So it's also resonating with me for that reason.
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
you're
got
ready for Sukkot.
exactly.
You got Pam's new book.
I got
I'm
Pam Janoff's new
jealous.
book. Pam Janoff's Star Stage and Screen with the Jewish Book Council will be out February 7th. I've actually already read it, but I
Can we
got
do a
2
traveling
copies.
arc with that? Can we do a sisterhood of
Yeah.
I actually
please.
got 2 copies, so yes, I'll send it to one of you and then you send it
one
to
will
the
send it
next.
to the other? Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see in the chat. Suzanne Fine said tonight was perfect. Thank you. And Andrea, you were dead on with the bookstagrammers jumping on Jean's book and really taking off with Jewish representation in books. And I think that's the gift you've given all of us, is that we do need the Jewish representation, and that is amazing. So now let me ask you another question. What do you want us to take from your books? Linda, what do you want?
I mean,
You know,
for me, like I said, it was really a joy. It was an escape for me to write this book, because at night, when I was so worried about somebody getting COVID in my house, I would go to sleep thinking about my characters, and it brought me a lot of joy and a lot of comfort. And I really hope that people take that away from this story. I hope it brings people joy.
and it totally will. Did I mention it's magic? Okay, Jean, what should we take away besides that we just are in love with your books?
Oh, I think it's really important that if you love the Matzo Ball, Mr. Perfect on Paper, the Matchmaker's Gift, that you go out there and you talk about these books, you buy these books, you tell your friends to buy these books. Publishers, unfortunately or fortunately, they look at sales, right? And if we want more joyous Jewish books, we need to uplift joyous Jewish books. And we can only do so much as the authors. We put our best work out there, but that's what I would say. If you love these books and you want more of them, be vocal about it. Just be vocal.
They will make very nice hostess gifts if you're going to somebody's house for the holidays.
That's actually a great point, and so much better than bringing
another like plate of rugelach. Bring them some
yeah, and nobody needs that candle. Buy books.
Book.
I completely agree. And I think the best part about it is you both end up with books at the end that celebrate being Jewish.
Yes.
And I think that's the best part, especially as we're going into the high holidays, and hopefully we will all be celebrating being Jewish, even if we're completely unprepared. That we need to celebrate being Jewish. And I think that's what you're both doing for all of us. So I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't read Mr. Perfect on Paper, go buy it like right now would be good. And the Matchmaker's Gift, if you pre-order today, it will be on your doorstep by Tuesday. I actually checked on Amazon and Bookshop and they're ready. So it said it would ship because I've already sent it to a few friends. So anyway, and then this has been great. I love doing things with the Dallas JCC, and I'm always very happy when Rochelle Weiss-Crane and I can work together. And I'd like to invite everybody to join me on October the 23rd, when I'll be here with my friend Wayna de Randell for The Last Rose of Shanghai, which is also an amazing book set in World War II in Shanghai. And she's an amazing Chinese Jewish author who we were brainstorming one day several years ago. And she says, Shanghai was fascinating. I said, no one's written it. You've got to write it. And 3 weeks later, she texted me and said, I just emailed you the draft of my book. I said, you did what?
3 weeks?
3 weeks. I said, Wayna, you can't write a book in 3 weeks. She goes, yeah, Andrea, the draft is in your email. So I checked my email and it was the first draft of this book. And Unbelievable. She is.
You can write a sentence in 3 weeks.
Right.
Oh no, she is. I'm telling
Like
you,
an outline, maybe?
she is so fascinating that I hope everybody will join us October 23rd. The book is already out, so you should buy that one too. The Last Rose of Shanghai. But that's a true story. And at that point, I said, we've got to do something at the Dallas JCC. You're crazy. You wrote a book in 3 weeks. So true story. So I want to thank everybody. At our highest point tonight, we had over 80 people, and that's a tribute to our amazing authors. And Linda, we will be cheering you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.